anytime you go to an expert, they have all of their training, all their education, their certification, and then they have all of their experience. That is something that is to be respected. That is something to be cherished because it takes so much of their adult life to get to that point. However, that never trumps and that never extends past the amount of hours that you have with your specific child. And so you know your specific child better than anyone else on the planet because you spend the most time with them. When we get into a medical environment, we tend to kind of abdicate that knowledge thinking, oh, well, it's not valuable because I don't have an MD behind my name or I'm not an RN. And that's not true. We need to step into that expertise of our own child and use it as collaboration. And we need to share our intuition. Mother's intuition is data.
Getting pregnant and giving birth are two of the most exciting things you can ever hope to experience in this life. The moment you think you could be pregnant, you're frantically searching for all the best information, which is why you're here today. I'm Stephanie King, and with my many years of experience as a professional childbirth educator, doula, and lover of all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, I'm here to make preparing for your birth enjoyable, empowering, and totally easy. Each week, I'll cover different topics, interview professionals, and get into the nitty-gritty birth stories from mamas just like you. And when you're ready for more, you can join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I take you step by step through exactly how to prepare your mind, body, spirit, and partner for a birth you love. So let's get started. Now, I know that you guys know that vaccines are a super hot topic for every parent right now, whether that's for yourself during pregnancy or for your future baby. And what we want to kind of dive into today is, are we getting the whole story or are we just being told what's convenient? So today I have Alexandra Galaska from Just the Inserts, and we're going to dig into those inserts, what informed consent should really look like, and the questions that every parent deserves to be asking. So Alexandra is the founder of Just the Inserts, a platform dedicated to empowering individuals with accessible, transparent information about medical choices. With a solid research background and a passion for informed consent, she guides people through the complexities of pharmaceutical products and decisions. Her commitment to clear, reliable information has earned her recognition as a trusted voice in the community, helping countless individuals make more informed, confident healthcare decisions. So you guys, I have followed Alexandra for a while now, and I absolutely love her content. So I'm excited for you guys to hear from her today. And with that, Alexandra, will you say hello to everybody and maybe just tell us a little bit about you?
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I do a lot of different interviews, and the birth and pregnancy ones are always my favorite. So I'm so giddy to be here today. My core passion in life is motherhood. I have 3 young children. I have soon to be 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And my journey with informed consent is very interwoven with my journey as a mother. When I first started the pregnancy journey for my first daughter, I was so obsessed with research, and I wanted to read all the books and all the blogs and all of the Instagram posts, and I just got really overwhelmed. And so we can talk more about it. I'm sure it'll come up throughout our discussion today, but I just wanted to create a resource that I wish that I would have had at the beginning of that journey. So everything I do is always for the moms. It's always for the person that I was 6+ years ago. And one thing that kind of distinguishes me from other people is that everything that I source, 99.9% of the resources that I source are .gov resources. So from the CDC, from the FDA, from the National Institutes of Health, also known as NIH. That other little percent is typically .edu. So any educational institutions that might have more resources that our government might not have. So that is something that was really important for me when I first started researching. I just wanted the objective kind of neutral stance on things. And then as I started researching, I started realizing there was so much more to the conversation than what is typically talked about. And so that's what I do. I just put it out there so anybody else that's like me that wants the information can get it. And we've just grown into an incredible community. So thank you so much for allowing me to share this passion of mine with yours.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being here. And in fact, you and I are very similar that way. I think a lot of moms come up against that when you are becoming a mother and you're dealing with your own things during pregnancy. You do start questioning because you're like, wait, and you talk with other women and how come it's different for them or how come their provider said this? And so I think it's very natural what is happening, but it's been silenced for a long time. And so you just putting it out there, and I think it's so important that you're saying it's all .gov stuff. It's all stuff that is accessible to every single person. Why aren't we talking about it a little bit more? Or why are these conversations so taboo? I think that's really important. You kind of have your own personal situation with pharmaceuticals and all of that. Can you kind of dive into that before we get started?
Absolutely. Definitely. So well, it really actually started when I was active duty military. Before I ever became a mom, I ended up having some adverse reactions. Oxycontin was not a friend of mine. And it was something silly. I was just thrown from a tube on a lake and I had a neck sprain and I ended up having a really, really bad adverse reaction to that. And so it kind of planted this seed that just because something is recommended to me by a healthcare professional doesn't mean that it's exactly the right thing for me, my personal situation. And so I started to kind of shift my understanding. And I grew up military. So I grew up with this kind of putting healthcare providers into an authority position that I had to obey what they said. And then I started realizing that it's more of a relationship. It's more of a collaboration. It's more of they are providing a service. They have expertise from their training and their experience, and they can provide advice and they can provide, they can consult me. And then I can decide if that resonates with me or if I can go maybe get a second opinion. So all of that started to kind of get planted when I was military. And then I started developing really, really severe adult acne. I struggled with that for about 5 years. And I went from specialist to specialist and just really experienced the full range of the healthcare environment, including the gaslighting and some of the more unspoken things that maybe we whisper to each other, but we really don't talk about out loud. And I realized that this is real. This is happening. Like people are not getting the healthcare that they need. And so I have a business background and I started to kind of research a little bit more about the way that the industry is structured and potential financial conflicts of interest and external pressures and all these other things that end up just coming into like when you go into healthcare, you end up like just getting hit by a brick wall of these realities of how the industry is structured. And it really, really came so apparent to me when I was pregnant with my first child. I was sitting in my midwife's appointment and she handed me a 1-page sheet for the Tdap vaccine. That's the vaccine for tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. And she handed me the sheet and she said, this is what you're going to get in your next appointment. And that was it. There was no extra conversation. I took it and I was like, okay, what, like at the time, I even remember saying like, I'm not anti-vaccine, but it seems kind of odd to vaccinate because I just hadn't been exposed to that in my mind, I had not been exposed to the thought that pregnant women had gotten vaccines. I had gotten it for the military, but I don't know, it just seemed a little odd to me. So I ended up asking my mom to research it for me because I was so exhausted from all the research. And when she came back to me a few days later with her research, it was so incredibly intense. The way that she was speaking is as if I was standing on the edge of a cliff getting ready to jump off. So much anxiety, so much urgency, sense of urgency in her voice. And it just really shut my brain off. I could not process what she was saying. And so I started talking to some friends. I started looking on Instagram. I started looking on Pinterest because those are my sources of information at the time. And I realized that the vaccine conversation is incredibly polarizing and it was incredibly fear-based. Every single thing that I saw was your baby and you are going to die if you accept this product. And then on the flip side, it was your baby and you are going to die if you don't accept this product. And so I just was very confusing and I didn't know who to trust. And so I ended up knowing, because of my business background and my government background, I knew that every single product on the market had to have some kind of legal document to it, had to have some kind of manufacturer guidance. I mean, you go and pick up an espresso machine or you go and pick up a vacuum, there's going to be a manual in there that provides the information that you need to know about that battery, or if you need to have a certain wattage for the thing to work and not blow up your house. And so there's always some kind of legal connection to a product. I would say 99.9%, unless you're like buying something on Amazon that's like definitely off market. But I just knew that. So I ended up finding what they're called manufacturer inserts. And so for those that don't know, manufacturer inserts are for all prescription pharmaceuticals on the market. There are some inserts for over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, or there's insert-like information. So acetaminophen, Miralax, things like that. But for all prescription pharmaceuticals, so that's Botox, Pitocin, epidurals, things like that, there are inserts that are publicly available on the FDA website. And it's basically all the information that the government and manufacturer are trying to disclose to healthcare providers and to patients and parents, so you can make a more informed decision. And it has a very simple template, and it just goes through, okay, these are the things that were found in clinical trials before the product was brought to market. These are the things that might, these adverse reactions that might be caused after the product goes to market. That's called post-marketing adverse reactions. And there's a post-marketing surveillance system that typically, whether it's through drugs or vaccines. And then it talks about special populations. So these are the considerations if you're pregnant. These are the considerations if you're breastfeeding, if you're pediatric, if you're geriatric, if you have liver concerns. These are some things that you need to be aware of. These are some drug interactions, food interactions. For example, Adderall, in the Adderall insert, it says that if you have vitamin C, it lowers the effectiveness of your Adderall. And so I started finding all these nuggets of wisdom as I was going through these inserts. And even like things like Miralax, it says on the insert that it should not be used for anyone under 17 years old. And how often is Miralax recommended by pediatricians? I've had some people message me that their 6-week-old babies were recommended to be on Miralax every day for years. And that is completely contradicting to what the government and the manufacturers say. So I just started sharing my information, and I started sharing it on my my personal Instagram, and I was getting so much heat, and I was getting a lot of logical fallacies of people not necessarily arguing me about the content and what I was sharing from .gov information, but what I looked like, what I sounded like, where I lived, my situation, my lifestyle, and all these extra things. So I realized I needed to create an account for just the inserts, and that's how it started. And it's been growing, and I cover everything. I cover biologics, I've covered vaccines, over-the-counters, prescriptions, and then I do a few devices as well. And so it's been just a wonderful journey, and I'm so blessed to be a part of it.
Yeah, I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. And oftentimes when we're getting that heat, I think that's kind of confirmation that we've hit the nail on the head, and it's something that we need to be talking about. So I'm glad it didn't stop you. I'm glad that you kept going.
Well, I think that's the stubbornness of me.
We all need a little bit of that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about those inserts, because this is a huge thing. If we want to talk about pregnancy and what we're going to be offered during pregnancy, that's in the way of like Unisom or vaccines or any of these other things that come up for us. And I, even in my course, like I bring this all the way back to when they were talking about thalidomide and prescribing that to women, and it was causing all these deformed babies, and then they stopped doing it. And anyways, so our medical system is not perfect, and what we understand about medicine even now is not perfect, and what we say about it isn't always true as well. And so just thinking about that and working with your provider, and they're bringing up these things that they think you should be doing, and it's said in such a way that really doesn't make you feel like you have a choice. As like you were saying, this is what you're getting on your next thing. Here's the sheet so you know. Why do you think women aren't being given the inserts? Why do you think that's being withheld, or we have to go and find it ourselves?
Oh, man. We could do a 10-part series. So from the clinician side of things, and I know this because I've talked with hundreds, probably thousands of healthcare providers, and I've read all of the psychological, anthropology type, sociology type papers on this. So in order to increase effectiveness or efficiency, I guess I should say, there is something called presumptive delivery strategy. And this is something that is adopted in many healthcare settings. And it's kind of what I was talking about earlier, where there's this perception of authority for healthcare providers. And they're trained in this strategy, this presumptive delivery strategy. And it's very simple. So imagine you're in your pediatrician's office. They come in, the nurse comes in and says, these are the shots that your child is getting today. Or you're in your OB's office and they walk in and say, this is the shot that you're getting today. There's no conversation. There's no, okay, do you want to talk about the risks and benefits? Do you want to talk about the alternatives? Do you want to talk about the disease? Do you want to talk about prevention, treatment? Do you want to talk about all these other things? It is that option is completely eliminated from the conversation for efficiency purposes because, and this I have cited on my website in my training course, because that time to discuss all of your concerns is not billable. There's not an insurance code for it typically. And so they need to have that efficiency. And we can talk at length on the right and wrongness of that, but that's just what I have found to be reflected in the papers that I've read and the studies that I've read, is that is the main goal of it is efficiency because they're churning out so many patients that they don't have the time to have those conversations. And so that's why I advocate so intensely for you to go find those inserts yourself and to go learn how to read those inserts. And I'm not going to leave you hanging. I have a free training course, no email required, to teach you exactly how to do this. I actually took a very dry and boring FDA course on how to read inserts, and I made it more aesthetically pleasing, and I have it all cited from the FDA. But I teach you how to do that. It takes 2 to 3 hours to go through. And it's so important because when you are getting recommended a medical product, most panel sizes or most sizes of a practice are around, I think the last I saw was like 700 to maybe 1,500 patients, depending on your country or city or something like that. That's a lot of people that your provider has to remember medical history, has to remember all of the pharmaceuticals that you're on, all of the natural things that you're on, natural supplements that you're on that also can have interactions with whatever you're on. And so there are just so many things that they have to keep track of, and it's impossible. It is genuinely impossible for them to have all of that in consideration when they're in a 10 to 15 minute appointment with you. And so it's so important for us to step into that authority, to step into that responsibility and say, okay, I'm going to make an informed decision about this. I'm going to take their recommendation based on their expertise and what they are trained in. And then I'm going to read the insert and see if it resonates with me and my family. So going back to your question on why inserts are really talked about, the main thing is time, efficiency. There's no financial billing or coding for it, so it's not sustainable for their business model. And then the other aspect of it too is that many providers are just not taught about inserts. So how can they provide the inserts to their patients if they themselves haven't been taught about inserts? I have had so many nurses actually screen record or screenshot their immunology books or some training that they've had in nursing school and said, I wasn't taught this. Did I miss a sick day? Was I sick the day they talked about it? And like, no, it's not taught to them how to find and read inserts. It's not taught to them the 1986 Act that provides immunity for vaccine manufacturers. They're not taught any of this stuff, drugs or vaccines. And so it's really, really important, again, as us, as consumers, to be that informed consumer and to do that research for ourselves. And then if you are emboldened to, it would be great if you printed out the insert, highlighted concerns that you have, write questions in the margins, and then bring that to your healthcare provider so you can have that efficient appointment with them. And then you can expose the inserts to them. I have a great story. This one woman was messaging me. She was on, I can't remember which medication she had to be on, but I believe it was a seizure medication, and she was in the hospital, and she read the insert, and it said in this medication that she could not breastfeed for it. And so she asked the nurse, can I get some donor milk, or can I look at what formula options you have? And the nurse was like, oh no, we have plenty of moms that are on that. And she pulled up the insert and she said, no, actually it's contraindicated for babies. And she was like, I've never even seen an insert. And so the whole nursing staff started pulling up this insert, and the head nurse came in and she just thanked the patient for her being exposed to this because they had never been taught it.
That is an awesome story. And I wish there were more of that. I feel like the frustration comes from when we bring this information to providers, say that it's not inserts, but say it's even, something just different from what they're recommending that we would like to do. the conversation that we're having back is volatile
Yes,
or like,
definitely.
super rough to have. And so I feel like I don't know. That's like a whole separate thing. That's actually, I'm going to get into that in just a moment. I do have questions for you about that. But just taking it back to the inserts for a second. If a mom is reading an insert, I know you say you have this class and stuff, and I'll make sure to link to everything so that you guys have access to this that are listening. But what are the things that really need to catch our attention? What are the things or surprising risks or what stands out? What should we be paying attention to on those inserts?
That is such a great question. So anytime you pull up an insert, there's going to be an overview page called the highlights of prescribing information. It's a great page. It gives you kind of like all the tidbit information. However, it's also not the most fulfilling of informed consent, in my opinion, because in that warning section, there's going to be a little block and it says warning and precautions, and there's going to be a little block that says adverse reactions. Most of the time, the only thing in those sections are from preclinical trials. And so for those that aren't aware, most clinical trials are really only hundreds to thousands of people, whereas according to the CDC, most adverse reactions, those rare delayed adverse reactions, are not evident until millions of people have accepted this product. So I always, if I get an insert, the first thing that I do is I scroll to section 6.2. It's post-marketing adverse reactions. These are all the adverse reactions that have been reported to the manufacturer, to the FDA, and there is some element of causation there. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's just legal so they don't get sued. No, that's actually incorrect. I pull from the FDA. There are 3 criteria that at least one of those criteria have to be met in order for an adverse reaction to be listed in that section, and all of them have to do with causation. And so it's really important when you're reading that section 6.2 to understand these are adverse reactions that were reported by real people in the public to the manufacturer, to the government, and the manufacturer and government is now giving you that information to say, hey, by the way, these are known potential adverse reactions. And so one of the biggest examples that I always bring up, and it baffles me that this product is still on the market, but there are 2 DTaP vaccines. So diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. These are the ones that are typically given to babies at 2, 4, 6 month old, and I believe at 15 months and 4 years old. But those 2, 4, 6 month old timeframes are really important because there are 2 manufacturers that produce the DTaP vaccine that they're licensed by the FDA. And one of those manufacturers, they produce the DTaP vaccine called Infanrix. If you scroll to section 6.2, the adverse reaction section on that insert, sudden infant death syndrome is listed in the adverse reaction section of that DTaP vaccine. And why is that important? Because according to the National Institutes of Health, the highest rate of SIDS for a baby in America is at 2, 4, 6 months old. And so that's really important for a parent to understand when you are accepting a product that the manufacturer and government are disclosing to you that this product has been linked to sudden infant death syndrome and is administered at the same time that our National Institutes of Health says that a baby is at its highest rate of SIDS. Now, what's really concerning to me is that most of the time when a parent is about to accept the DTaP vaccine, they are given something called a vaccine information statement. That is not an insert. It is a quick high-level view of the vaccine produced by the CDC. It is not all the information that you need in order to make an informed decision. The example that I give in my book is if you're shopping for a coffee machine or something, that vaccine information statement is just the outside of the box. It's just the stuff on the outside of the box, the quick high-level information, and the insert is the actual manufacturer guidance that you would get inside of the box. And so that vaccine information statement for the DTaP vaccine, the outside of the box, all it says is, this vaccine does have a risk of death or fatal adverse reactions or something like that. But if a parent saw sudden infant death syndrome listed on that, they would take a second to pause. They would take a second and ask, okay, can we talk about this more? Can we talk about why this is something that is showing up? Can we talk about maybe the dosage levels in the Infanrex versus Daptosil, which is the other DTaP vaccine? And so those are just things, again, as informed consumers, we need to be aware of. The government knows, the manufacturer knows, but the parents don't know.
Well, and if, don't get me started. I feel I'm not going to do that. I'm going to bring it back. Okay. So in your view then, let's talk about the difference between medical advice and medical coercion. And where is that line? And some of this, like as I'm hearing you talk, we're like, okay, maybe providers don't know about these things, which I understand that they're not taught. But at some point, I feel like the majority of providers have an idea of what's going on. I mean, if you listen to the news or scroll on Instagram or anything, this is a conversation that has been had for some time now. So at that point, it's like kind of their responsibility to be reading those things and be aware of them anyways. But even say that they don't, and their only job is to make sure that this next step happens and they feel that they're doing their best there. Where is that line? When does advice become coercion?
Absolutely. Well, ultimately, you have the final decision. If you have responsibility of any adverse reactions for your child, whether that be disease complication or pharmaceutical complication, you therefore have the authority to make that decision. So if any medical provider is saying that you have to do something, I would definitely push back a little bit and see if that's actually true. Now, when we say you have to do something, there might be some legal things that you need to consider depending on your state. If you live in a state where you have to vaccinate in order for your child to have educational access, public education, in that statement, yes, that's actually true. However, you can also homeschool. There's other things you have to do. So you really want to define that have to. What does that have to mean? Typically, there's always a qualifier on that have to statement. You have to in order to comply with hospital policy. You have to in order to keep your job. But you don't actually have to when it comes down to it. You get to decide. There might be some consequences based on our culture, but you get to ultimately decide what you accept, delay, or decline for your child. Now, I will say as a caveat to that, there are definitely some considerations if there's open CPS cases, if there's custody battles, things like that. I am not a legal professional. Please consult a legal professional in your state that is experienced with those situations. But at large, you have the decision. You have the authority and responsibility to make that final decision. Now, one thing that I have been really, really, really starting to be aware of is something called the invisible nudge. And I actually did a podcast episode on it, and I was so impressed with the response that I got from healthcare providers because a lot of them reached out to me and said, wow, I had no idea this is how I was trained. And what it is little psychological things that they are taught in their training from the get-go, from their first pre-med class, all the way out through their education and in their job on-site job training is kind of these psychological nudges that happen throughout your experience in a healthcare setting. So I'll give you an example. So if a mom is sitting in the delivery room and they bring up the synthetic vitamin K injection, or they bring up the eye ointment.
Erythromycin.
Thank you. I was like, wait, hold on. Did I say, I was thinking of a different antibiotic the other day. And I was like, wait, did I say the right antibiotic? Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. You would know. Yeah. You would be the expert on that. So you're sitting in that, hospital bed and the nurse says, okay, it's time for the baby to get whatever it is. And then you pause and there's some hesitation. And then the nurse says, this is what most moms do, or this is what a good mom would do, or, or something like this is what moms do to keep their babies safe. Any comment like that, that's an invisible nudge. Because what mom would hear that and be like, well, I don't want to be a good mom. I don't want my baby to be safe. I don't want my baby to be healthy. Of course not. And so it creates this environment, this hurdle, this invisible hurdle that as a newborn mom or whatever situation you're in, that now you have to climb over this hurdle, this psychological hurdle. And it's so overwhelming. And it can be hostile without even from the outside looking in, looking hostile, but there's so much of an internal battle going on. And so I think that because of this invisible nudge culture, there is rampant medical coercion happening. Anytime that there's any kind of influence to sway someone to accept, delay, or decline. I see it on the other side too. I see it for people on social media that are trying to get people to not accept a product, but they use authority bias, or they use some kind of logical fallacy to try, false dichotomy to say, like I said earlier, if you don't accept it, or if you do accept it, your baby's going to die, you're going to have an injury. That's not necessarily true either. And so that's where I have really kind of tried to cut through the noise on all of it and say, okay, at the end of the day, you are personally responsible and you personally have the authority. So you can make that decision. And being a good mom is not conditional upon which medical products that you accept, delay, or decline.
Yeah. And I want to be really clear. I hope that people understand this as we're talking today. Like, this is not about being pro-vax or anti-vax or pro-medication or and it's not about hating on providers or anything like that. This is simply about information. And this is something I'm talking about all the time. Informed consent, when we're talking about, all these inductions being offered at 39 weeks or epidural versus not epidural. It has nothing to do with that and everything to do with your right and intuition as a mom to make big decisions for you and your family, and to feel like you have some power in doing that instead of feeling like you don't have a choice. And one of the things that, as we're talking here and we're talking about different providers are not bad. And it's also really important that you find somebody that you can connect with and that you agree about things on. Because I will tell you early on, that was one of the issues that I had with my first baby and my first pediatrician. And whatever I did, anytime that I did decline something, which I didn't decline at all, but anytime that I questioned anything that he was doing, and specifically with vaccines, it was, okay, you need to sign this statement before you leave. All these little things that I'm just like, why do I feel like I'm being attacked for making decisions that I feel are correct for my child? And when I switched providers and I found somebody that was like, these are your decisions, how can I help you? That is a huge difference. One is creating a case against me on the side, and I have to worry every time about taking my baby in to see this person. And the other is like, let's work on this together. You're the parent, you get to decide. So, and that's the same for during pregnancy, OB or midwife or whoever is over your care, that stuff really matters. So anyways, I just wanted to make sure that we were really clear about that, because we're talking about some spicy things, and it gets people a little worked up. And so it's really important that moms just know, like, this is your job to take care of yourself. And it's really just about getting the information.
I love that you put that in there, because I think that is something that we get this kind of false binary, that if you want to improve the industry and you want to make it more efficient and more collaborative with the patient, then therefore you don't like it at all. And that's not true, right? And I would say, I'm just kind of throwing out a number, but I would say that just the inserts community is at least 30 to 40% healthcare providers. And I even had a healthcare provider recently reach out to me, and she wants me to consult her for her practice to draft that declination form, because she feels like it's necessary for her practice to cover herself legally, to have, if someone wants to decline that vaccine in her state, she just wants to have some kind of documentation that she did, recommend it, but she also respects informed choice. And she has one, and she wanted me to consult with her to say, how can I frame this better so it doesn't have that invisible nudge? It covers me legally in my state, but also I want to make sure that the parent doesn't feel like I'm trying to persuade them, I'm trying to sway them. I just want them to know that I, consulted them and go forward. And I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. And I think that's a sign of the culture shifting. We have a pro-informed consent provider directory. We have almost 200 providers now that are listed, and all of these providers have opted in saying, yes, I will honor informed consent for all of my patients and parents, whether they accept, delay, or decline. And the interesting thing, we've been, for almost a year now, we've been contacting providers, and we've been trying to vet all these providers. And I've gone through, oh my gosh, like thousands of websites looking at providers. And even in the last year, I have noticed a big difference on provider websites on how the language is starting to shift a little bit. Not 100%. You still get the ones out there that are just, super against it, don't even want to have a conversation. But I'm starting to see a little bit of a change here and there, just in the way that they present the conversation, just in the way that they say, okay, we are for this product. However, we will talk with you and we will spend that extra time with you. We'll make sure that there's 20 extra minutes in your appointment so we can have that dedicated time. Because that's the one thing that I get a lot of moms will message me on, is that they ultimately want to accept that product, whether it be a vaccine or antibiotic or something like that, they just want more information. They just want to have a little bit more comfort in their decision. And it's not just that blanket, well, the doctor told me I had to. That isn't cutting it anymore. Parents want to be informed, and they want to make sure that whenever they accept a product, they also want to be aware of any early warning signs so that they can eliminate diagnostic confusion, so they can expedite medical treatment if necessary. And that's what all the inserts are. And that's why I say, even if every single person who came to my website, took my free training course, came to my social media, ended up accepting those products, I would be happy, because then they got the informed consent that they deserve.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same. I'm exactly the same. And I think that's absolutely right. That's exactly it. Yeah. And, we talk about, I know you talk about this too, kind of like mother's intuition and stuff. And when you have that information, can you take a moment and kind of talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So here, and this is something I kind of go back onto my business training, is whenever you have any kind of an expert, right? Whether it be a tax expert, whether it be a mechanic, even a hairstylist is an expert, because there's a lot of chemistry going on with colors and things like that. Anytime you go to an expert, they have all of their training, all their education, their certification, and then they have all of their experience. So for a healthcare provider, every single patient that they've had before, all of the trainings or conferences that they go to where they're exposed to other people's experience. And that's all wonderful. That is something that is to be respected. That is something to be cherished, because it takes so much of their adult life to get to that point. However, that never trumps, and that never extends past the amount of hours that you have with your specific child. And so your specific child better than anyone else on the planet, because you spend the most time with them. You have the most anecdotal experience and evidence and observations than anyone else on the planet. No matter their certifications, no matter how many awards they have, you know your child best. And so when we get into a medical environment, we tend to kind of abdicate that knowledge, thinking, oh, well, it's not valuable because I don't have an MD behind my name, or I'm not an RN. And that's not true. We need to step into that expertise of our own child and use it as collaboration. And we need to share our intuition. I have a sweatshirt that I came out with that says, a mother's intuition is data. And it's because when we become mothers, especially if we had pregnancy and we have hormones and we have, all those other things that are interplaying after we have the baby, our awareness levels are spiked. Our ability to detect changes in temperature is heightened. And so there are all these things that we are actually tied to our baby, and it's data. And it's important for us to step into that authority to be able to share that with the provider, because you need to be able to explain the observations in a clear and concise way so that provider can take that data, take that intuition that you have, and be able to apply it to their expertise, their training, their awareness, and things like that to make a better decision or diagnosis, or recommend a better diagnosis, recommend a better treatment plan for your child. And so I think that's something where a lot of moms, we kind of just think, okay, well, we're going to go to the doctor. They're going to do a quick physical exam, if they even do that, and I'm just going to trust what the doctor says. And that's something that, for me, I personally have just a composition notebook that I got from the dollar store for each of my children. And I write down, okay, what's their baseline temperature? If they've gotten sick in the past, what it was their temperature spiked to? What is their basic demeanor when they get up in the morning and I know that it's going to be a bad day? What are the signs that I know that it's going to be a bad day? Different things, different observations. That is clinical gold to be able to have that information, and it differs for every child. So as moms, we can step into that and be like, okay, a mother's instinct is data. I have all this data. Now I can use it to help and have a more collaborative and productive conversation with my provider.
Yeah. How about, I know that we're kind of talking about a lot of different medical things here, vaccines and medications and all that stuff. Seeing as this has been definitely more of a conversation recently, especially with vaccinations. And we know that these things, there are risks and benefits to everything that we do, right? And we're talking about informed consent. What is it about vaccines, do you think, that has stopped providers from talking about them in this way, or who, that has stopped the conversation in general?
That's such a good question. And I have sat down and tried to really figure it out. I don't know why. I don't know why vaccines are so polarizing. They're just a medical product. I mean, we don't have this hostile of a conversation about antibiotics. We don't have this hostile of a conversation about ear exams or, all these other things. I mean, of course, you might have like the French people that are really upset, but at large in our community, can you think of any other medical product that is this polarizing?
Yeah, no,
I
it's so
can't.
interesting.
I can't think of anything. So I have really like sat down and thought about this. Why is it? And I think it has a lot to do with we have this concept of a social contract when we're talking about vaccines, because then we start talking about herd immunity. We start talking about the immunization laws in our state in order for a child to have access to education, some employment opportunities. I know in the military, I was forced to have vaccines. I didn't really question it at the time, but there was never a choice on whether I was vaccinated or not. When you go to college, most of the time you have to get a meningococcal or you have to get some kind of other vaccine. And so there's this idea of a social contract. In order for you to be a part of society, you need to accept these products. However, when you start reading the inserts, especially the limitations of effectiveness sections and the shedding sections, that kind of obliterates the whole social contract aspect, because according to the manufacturer, according to the government, and I have this all cited, so if anybody's alarm bells are going off, it's all cited from .gov resources. I'll have it on my website. When you start researching all these things and you realize, okay, so the manufacturer and the government's telling me that even if I accept this product, I might not be protected. If I can't be protected, how am I protecting the herd? That doesn't work. Or if I accept a product and it's a live vaccine, I could actually cause risk because I might actually shed. So I've had medical providers that have told me that they will never, ever recommend the MMR for a toddler that has a pregnant mother, because the toddler can expose the vaccine strain of the varicella, and that's incredibly dangerous for a pregnant woman. And so there are all these things in the inserts when you start reading and getting down to the nitty gritty of it, realizing, okay, this social contract thing actually doesn't make a lot of sense, but we're so ingrained in it with our culture and society. I mean, there's so many things that we look at when we look at even TV and television, film, on how vaccines are always kind of like the good guy and they're always the savior to humanity. And on the flip side, the bad guy is the one that's withholding this life-saving vaccine or medication. And so it's just constantly reiterated in our culture. And it's really hard to break through that, especially when you start reading inserts and you pop it on Instagram and people just get really upset about it. I think it's because it's constantly enforced. And, you go to the grocery store and you see a sign for the flu vaccine and you see the sign for the pneumonia and all these other things and the COVID vaccines. And so it's kind of like always present without us realizing how present it is.
Yeah, I think probably what brought it so much recently to the forefront was COVID, because
Oh, absolutely.
there was a lot that was going on with that, people losing their jobs or not being able to join the military or getting kicked out of the military, or, just all of that stuff. That was definitely something that brought it to light. But I do think it's a good thing, because I will tell you, when I was having my children, 16, 17 years ago now, these things weren't talked about, and they were so taboo that if you did talk about it, it was dangerous. And so I remember being online and looking at forums, and it would be like these moms groups, like on babycenter.com or whatever. And, did you get the flu vaccine? And yeah, and it was like mom after mom in that situation who I miscarried, and I've never miscarried before. And I was 25 weeks and I was 18 weeks. And I was just like, wait, why is nobody talking about this? And why, when I bring it up to my provider, are they so like hot stove? Don't you dare say anything like that. And then the other side of it, like you were talking about, I remember early on in before I was having children, and we had a small company, and this lady came in to give everybody their flu shots, for the season. And I asked her, like, I have no desire to get this, like I get the flu, whatever. I'm young, healthy, I don't really care. But I was like, but everybody else here is getting it. And so if I don't get it, do I have a chance of getting it from them? And she said yes, which I'm like, years later, you can't say shedding. Shedding doesn't exist, right? That was a whole conversation. But so I ended up getting the vaccine. That was the sickest I had been in years. I was sick for a week. I had to take time off work. And then I got the flu again the next year. I'm like, I'm so done. So and then, we're giving it to old populations and all these people. And when it comes to pregnancy, which I think is really important for moms to understand, there are no vaccines that are tested on pregnant women because it is morally, like, you cannot do that for moral reasons. And so the way that the women end up, the test that we have, the data that we have is from providers recommending it or making it not feel like a recommendation and saying, this is what you're getting at your next appointment. And then we grab data 10, 20, 30 years down the line and we say, oh, now we know the risks, never mind that a mom and baby have been put under, whatever kind of test subject to be able to do that. So I don't know. It's a big conversation. There's a lot of things that's why I love that you're like, no, it's from the .gov website. This is not made up. It's not my opinion. This is what they're saying. And I think that gives us a leg to stand on when we're going and talking with our providers.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I love that you ended with that because that's something that I always say. If you are going to speak with your provider, I would recommend never bringing up that you got it from Instagram or you got it from justtheinserts.com because they have been trained to disregard anything that doesn't end in .gov or .edu. And that's why I stick with those resources. And I think that's why we have such a large healthcare population in the Just the Inserts community because that is something that they hold in such high regard. And so whenever I talk with anyone, I always say, make sure you print out the insert, have it in your phone, write the URL and say like fda.gov and then, the URL on the top so they understand that because so many of them think, okay, you got this from a mommy blogger post or something like that. Like they will not listen to what you say, even if it's 100% accurate and backed by the FDA and the CDC. That's just something that they've been trained in their training. And so that's why I stick so much to it. And also it isn't just what, the healthcare providers, that's what I needed. I needed that objective kind of legalistic information when I was first starting researching because I'm saying, okay, if the government's saying this and the manufacturer is saying this, they're the most intimate with this product. They have the most authority and insight into this product. Why wouldn't I listen to what they have to say? Why wouldn't I take that into consideration? If the manufacturer for the RSV vaccines is telling me that I'm an increased risk for preterm labor, that's something I'm going to want to know in order to make a more informed decision. And if I have a nurse and doctor that doesn't read the inserts and doesn't know that, I'm going to go to the insert because the manufacturer and government work a lot closely with the development of that product and have oversight over that product. And yes, that nurse has anecdotal experience, but overall, the manufacturer and government has a lot more. And so that's something that as a consumer, I mean, just think of it like a consumer report I tried to shift the conversation because again, we go to that social contract and we have this kind of like hesitation to research. But I think I pulled up a stat and it was like when you're buying a new car, I think the average American spends about 10 to 15 hours researching new cars before they purchase a car. And I can't remember if it was 20 hours or something like that when we're planning a vacation. We will spend so much time researching before we make those kind of decisions. We should take so much more time to make decisions about our health because we can't go on those vacations. We can't drive our cars to work or job or school or anything like that if we don't have our health.
Yeah, I agree with that. And actually kind of leaning on that. So something that you mentioned was some of the effects that these vaccines had. One of them, you said something about SIDS, for example, which again, that was it's on the insert, but you can't talk about it because you can't say that vaccines can cause SIDS. And now we're seeing more and more information come out that absolutely they can. And parents need to be aware of that. But we have this conversation going right now. There's a lot of chronic health things going on, especially with our kids. And you've read a lot of these inserts. Are you seeing medications and vaccines as part of the issue with these chronic conditions?
Absolutely. Well, the HPV vaccine for years has had on the manufacturer insert autoimmune conditions and motor neuron disease or disorders. That's listed on the insert. The FDA has disclosed that those have been tied to the HPV vaccine to Gardasil 9. And so that is something that is completely baffling to me. When I look at just product evaluation, there have been other products that have been pulled from the market for much less less severe adverse reactions. And yet those products are still sitting on the market. And there's even public health campaigns to increase acceptance of those products. And that is something where I think a lot of this righteous anger comes from, and where I might get a little passionate when I talk about it, because this is where we need to kind of demand some more transparency and accountability from our government and from our manufacturers. If they know that this is listed and other products have been pulled for lesser reactions, then why is this product still on the market and still being heavily marketed to our youth? It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think that's where a lot of people will get super passionate. I know this last political year was super interesting to observe. And I think that's where a lot of people get super, super frustrated. And then you get people that are thinking that it's an attack on medicine. No, we just want safer medications. We just want safer technology, whether we're talking about vaccines or biologics or whatever it may be. We just want safety improvements. And that's one thing too. I will touch on this because I think it's important to the conversation. Most of the time, when you look at the pharmaceutical narrative, whether it be from a pharmaceutical representative, which again, I know this because many of them have reached out to me in my DMs, or whether it be a medical professional, many times when a product is on a market and there's that anecdotal experience, that woman saying, hey, I had a miscarriage, I've never had any infertility issues before, and I have these issues, or I have this chronic disease or condition that was triggered shortly after having a vaccine or exposure to this medication, or whatever it might be, they start having these stories, and the narrative is there's no way, there's no, correlation doesn't mean causation. Correlation doesn't mean causation. You hear that all the time. And then whenever a new product that is considered safer is brought onto the market, that's when the pharmaceutical company and healthcare industry will start to talk about the concerns and dangers of the previous product because they have a new product to replace it. And so it's like, it's not even acknowledged until a new product is on the market. And as a consumer, that's incredibly frustrating because we're kind of gaslit until there's a new product on the market. And then everything that we talked about is verified and credible. And that's really frustrating. And that's where we see this divide in public trust in healthcare. And I've talked with a few people that do work in public health departments in different states across the nation. And they've kind of asked like, okay, what can I do? And I'm like, well, just acknowledge. That's the first step. Just acknowledge that there is harm happening and that pharmaceutical injury does happen, and that these products are not infallible. We don't assume any other product on the market is infallible. Why are these protected? Why is this something that we can't even bring our concerns to the table? So I could talk a long time about that. Yeah. But those are the main ones.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you brought that up. I remember as I was like getting into, because I always joke that like pregnancy is a slippery slope. Like once you're pregnant and you're learning about all things pregnancy and birth and all this, and then that, it just rolls into the rest of your life. Now you start questioning everything. Now we homeschool our kids and we're all these crunchy moms,
now
right?
You have chickens.
Just a bunch of weirdos, which I'm totally on that train, by the way. But you can't help it. And but early on when I was learning about education and stuff, and I'm like, as I'm learning this stuff and I know how much I didn't know, how much it's not taught, I have to go tell everybody, right? I remember like there was one night where it was a local midwife, and I remember we all met in her house, and it was like this private thing, like you couldn't have these conversations out loud. And a mom came and shared her story of her child who was vaccine injured. And it's like that those were the only places that you were hearing those things. And it was all this like underground stuff. And so, yeah, when you were talking about being gaslit and stuff, it's like they know. And that is the frustrating part. That's the part. It's like, it's not like you don't know. And that it's so upsetting. And especially as a mom, because you're like, I just want to do what's best for my baby. And if it is having this medication, or if it isn't, like now we feel like we can't trust that. And that is a huge problem. So I'm glad that the conversation is happening. I'm hoping that divide is going to get, sealed up. And as you're talking about these incredible providers who are like, yes, I didn't know these things and I want to do what's best for my patients and myself and all of this. I think we're going to see hopefully more of that. But I do think this is part of the shift. So I'm really glad that you do what you do. I kind of here at the end, and I want to give you an opportunity to tell everybody where they can find you too. But for the mom that's listening, because I know conversations like this can be tricky and it can be hard to hear, and you just want to do the right thing, where would you tell these pregnant moms or these newly birthed moms, where would you tell them to start?
That is such a good question. And I think that really, that's not going to be the same answer for everyone because it really depends on your own journey to pregnancy and your own relationship with healthcare and your own relationship with making those more informed decisions in any aspect of your life. And so I actually have a weekly newsletter where I have these little tiny exercises, and it's almost like training a muscle. You just have these little exposures to build the informed consent muscle. And it can be as simple as reading the ingredients on maybe some over the counters that you have, your Tylenol. Read the ingredients. If you don't know what the ingredient is, take a picture of it and then Google what the ingredient is. What is it? How is that manufactured? How does that work in the body? I would recommend learning a little bit. I know this is something that I struggled with. I had biology in high school, but I don't remember any of that stuff. And so I go onto YouTube and I look up videos of the circulatory system or the endocrine system. And then, there's like 5-minute videos that are from accredited hospitals and just learn about that system. So if you're taking a medication and it talks about how it works in the body, then you can say, oh, okay, so that's how it affects my body. That makes sense why there's these other adverse reactions that I wouldn't consider this product to have, because this is how it works in the body. I'm going to be shameless and plug my free training course because I go through exactly how to do everything for finding inserts. And I go through each section and I talk about what is a mechanism of action, what is a contraindication, what is all of these other technical medical jargon things, but also that's just one part of it. And this resonates with your question. The second half of my course is all about that support. It's all about stepping into that responsibility and authority, making those informed decisions, whatever it may be. I have an exercise called Root of Fear, where you list out all the fears you have. What are you afraid of? Just specifically vaccines, we'll talk for a second. What are you most afraid of? Are you afraid of your pediatrician being mad at you? Are you afraid of the disease? Are you afraid of not having access to education or employment opportunities? All of those have a different type of fear, and all of those are going to have a different path of handling that fear and handling the research required to kind of calm those fears. So you can find everything at justtheinserts.com. My free training course, the provider directory, all of the pharmaceutical deep dives that I've done over 50 on there. I have my Instagram and my X. I'm not as active on X. It kind of overwhelms me, but I'm really active on Instagram.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here today and for what you're doing. I am so grateful for your time.
Thank you so much.
If you loved what you heard today, the very best way to support this podcast and help other moms to find it is to leave a quick review. I read one at the beginning of the episodes, and I would love for yours to be next. And if you're ready for even more pregnancy, birth, and postpartum goodness, come join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I will hold your hand and walk you through pregnancy and birth step by step so you're totally prepared for a birth you'll love. See you next week.